everybody. Welcome to the Going Analog podcast, in which some number of board gamers bring a different game and topic to discuss. I'm your host, Christina, and this episode will be released on official spoopy day, Halloween. So we wanted to bring on some friends to talk about some spoopy games. Joining us today are Ben Kepner and Dan Stong, the co-designers of Creepshow, a new suspense-building game that's perfect for creepy season since it's based on the Creepshow movie, directed by George Romero and written by Stephen King, that was also turned into a graphic novel. So great art, fantastic theme, of course. And so welcome to Going Analog.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in your design life, Ben?
Oh, man. So Creepshow, like I said, most recent co-design with Dan. Before that, I did Kim Joy's Magic Bakery, which is a bit of a tone shift, to Creepshow. Before that, my other main design was Pitch Storm, which is a movie pitching party game. Yeah, and then development work on, I don't know, so many of the games that Skybound has published over the last 10 years.
Great. And what about you, Dan? Hi, Dan.
Hi. Pretty similar. Before Creepshow, I had a solo design of Booty Call, which is an adult party game. We did it Skybound as a collaboration with Zach M. Stafford, who does Extra Fabulous, the webcomic. And before that, it was just, development work and writing cards and having fun.
Oh, and spoiler, we're going to talk about this more. So in a bit, yes.
Is Booty Call the one? So before the show, Dan was asking us how much he could swear because he designed a game, or you're working on a game that you can't not use swear words to describe.
is it's more profanity. It's like it's about dating ghosts. You're a lonely medium, and you've had your time on the dating apps, and you've decided, why not try to hook up with somebody I can actually talk to all the time? So you go looking in the great beyond, and you're looking for a ghost to hook up with. The ghost is trying to hook up with you, but there's other ghosts in the mix, and you don't want to be rude and enter somebody else's DMs, and you want to make sure you hit the right ghost.
Okay, that was well done. No profanity there.
I try really hard.
We didn't have to bleep any of that out.
But different story if you play the game, right?
This is, No.
And what will be your topic for us today, Ben and Dan?
We're going to talk about spooky games.
Okay. And Shu is here too, of course. Hi, Shu.
Hello. Yep, that was me.
Yes. And what is our topic going to be today?
Well, so these two guys, they were formerly of Skybound until relatively recently. And we know sometimes you have in-house designers that are employed by a publisher, and then they will design games for that publisher. And then sometimes there are independent game designers who will make games for various publishers, and sometimes really just a lot for one publisher, but they can work for any publisher. And then sometimes we've even seen people employed at one publisher make games for that publisher, but they can also make games for other publishers that maybe doesn't fit their employer's portfolio. So I'm just really curious about this entire world, and I figured, hey, we have two game designers here. We can ask about all this and how that dynamic works, and we'll get more into that a little bit later.
So we also like to start off with our gaming icebreaker, in which we highlight a game we've played recently or just want to talk about. So let's start with our game, Babylon. Shu.
So this game, some quick background. We first saw this game, Babylon. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the box here. It's about the creation of this wonder of the world, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And we first saw it at Gen Con. And then Christina and I got a demo that Christina made fun of me for afterward because I wasn't paying attention. I kept, as we were playing this demo, this was a kind of a private press demo, and then Christina afterwards was like, why did you keep asking questions that they already discussed and answered?
Literally like 2 minutes before it, then he would ask the same question.
Yeah. So the reason why, quick story, is because I didn't, when they were going over the rules, Danny Lowe, who's a marketing manager for Flat River, she was going over the rules. I only half paid attention because I'm like, oh, we're just getting an overview. Rude. I don't need to learn this game right now. And then so she's just going, this is what we do. No, well, she was just showing us, like, this is what you do, this is what you do. And then a moment later, it's like, okay, Shu, you're first. And I'm like, oh, crap. I wasn't really listening because I didn't know we were going to literally play. So I had to ask all these questions again that everyone's already knew the answers to, but me. But
I'm making you go first. That's
yeah, I know. It's such an embarrassing position. Yeah. But anyway, so the game is there's basically 2 steps in this game. One, there's this big sheet of like several little tiles that are different levels of a quarry. You're like taking these tiles to kind of lay the foundation in your personal player board. And the quarry will, depending on what piece you get, will give you different symbols on the tile, and it will allow you to pick up different plastic pieces like pillars and such. And then so what you do is you take this tile, you put it on your board, and then you'll start to take these pillars and other plastic pieces to kind of build different layers of these hanging gardens. So you should look it up if you're listening to this and you're like, what is he talking about?
Go look it up. Visually stunning.
Because it's a stunning. Visually gorgeous game. Because you're just you might have like 3 or 4 pillars. You put a little tile on top of it, and then from there you might build a bridge to another tile that's on the same level, or you might build stairs up to a higher level, or statues that have certain placement rules and such. So the entire game's about strategizing, like, well, what tile do I want to take, because that will give me access to certain pieces, and then where do I put it so that, for example, tile A's bridge icon is lined up with tile B's bridge icon with a gap in between. And then if you position everything perfectly, then you're allowed to go into the supply and grab that plastic piece. And now I have a bridge to connect those two because I lined everything up legally. Or I've created 2 fountain icons side by side to kind of bridge that gap, and you could get a fountain little piece. And then by the end, you start building this 3-dimensional sort of platform. It just looks so cool because there's like stairs going up. It's multi-level. It's not symmetrical at all. And then at the end, you're kind of doing a up down, like a straight down bird's eye view look. You sort of flatten your kind of your structure, and then you get scored based on what pieces, like these fountains and statues and bridges and so on, that you can see. You're allowed to cover them up with stuff with floors above it. So then once they're covered up, you don't count those anymore. But what you can see from the sky, and then what floor they're on. So if you built a bridge on floor 3, it's worth 3 times as many points as if you built it on floor 1. Fun. So it's really just a really cool looking game. It's really delicate. You have to be careful because there's a couple of times I'm like, oh my God, I just almost knocked everything over because I was trying to shift things around on the table. And then I thought it was very approachable, very accessible gameplay.
It just has some crunchy spatial puzzle sort of aspects to it that are really fun. Especially if you're into that sort of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, I had a friend, like our friend Albert, who was like really slow. He was just like, oh my God, I can't. He's like, I don't know why. He plays
thinks only in 2D.
Yeah, he plays heavy games.
In 2D, so.
He plays a lot of heavy games, but this one sort of like he was just a little bogged down in terms of like all the decisions you could make in there. But it is a pretty simple game. You could play it in probably 4 players. I'd say you could probably play it in about an hour or so. But again, it's just a really gorgeous game. It's totally the type of game that people will walk by maybe at a convention and be like, what are you guys playing? What are you all playing right there? And then you have to tell them about it. But it's super simple to play as well and very rewarding when you get things lined up just right. So I know you didn't play the final game. You played the demo. Christina. Mm-hmm. Like, what did you think at the time?
Oh, it was just like, I definitely wanted that game because it's so pretty. I want to play a full game this time, but like there were a couple other different scoring options with like flowers and things like that you can like work into your strategy too. So there are like, several different aspects to think about, but it didn't like kill me with like analysis paralysis. So I thought it was very smooth.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm not sure about long-term replayability because there's not a lot of things that really change it up. It's just, of course, it depends on what tiles you draft. Mm-hmm. But it's a pretty cool game. I think I can imagine an expansion would probably be pretty awesome.
Yeah. At the end of their game, we were playing another game next door. They were like, okay, now we get the tiebreaker based off of which garden looks the best. So we had to go around and judge their gardens, which was fun.
Oh, yeah. Literally. That was just for fun. That was like a house rule.
And what game did you bring for us today, Ben and Dan?
We brought a game called Rattus. It's about the Black Plague. It's designed by Usa and Henrik Berg. It came out in English from Z-Man. It also is produced by White Goblin Games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is one of those games where it's like, for as long as I've known Dan, for like, which, I don't know, has been like 12, 13 years now. It's
13
like
years, 14 years.
Yeah, it's like Dan's always like, can we, like, I don't know, I feel like you're always looking for an excuse to play Rattus, like, which is great. Like, no complaints. Like,
there's so much content. It's astounding.
Yeah.
And so what is Rattus? Yes.
So Rattus is a game where it's the 1500s. We're in some approximation of Europe and sometimes North Africa, and the Black Plague is spreading around. The way we're going to be playing through is you are playing as a faction of survivors, represented, of course, by little wooden cubes in your color. And you are going to take turns placing some cubes on the board, populating a territory, spreading the plague around as it moves around Europe. Maybe it's moving into territories where your opponents have some cubes, get them off the board, because you're trying to have the most cubes on the board at the end of the game.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing about this game is that it's like, it's at the end of the game, it's super simple. You're just trying to have the most cubes, right? You're just trying to, it's an area, kind of an area control game, right? Where you're just trying to have the most cubes of your color on the board, but you're interacting with this really interesting little abstract system that does like a pretty fun job of approximating a plague, right? Where you've got like rats that follow the people, and then you've got the plague happens that remove the people, and then the rats spread out and the people spread out and flee, and then the rats follow them, and then that kind of happens in this like pretty simple and pretty intuitive little ecosystem for the, I don't know, 15 turns of the game or something. Like it's not a long game, which I think is also fun and impressive to approximate the entire scope of the plague, in like such a simple little game.
Yeah. Like on your turn.
So far, we've heard Dan talk about dirty games, a game about death, and I'm developing this picture of.
I've got a shirt with Hawaiian Bigfoot having cosmopolitans. Like, I don't know why we're upset about things.
He's a man of many facets. Okay.
Yeah. But also, like, 'tis the season. Like we're here to talk about spooky stuff. Yeah.
But what joyful art.
And so this is like a perennial favorite of yours, it sounds like?
It was one of my gateway games into modern gaming. I used to go to play board games at a community theater friend's house with his family on Sundays, and this was one of the games that made its way to table quite often. And I was like, oh, I want to play that one again. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, like a simple turn is like there are 6 different suits of characters that are available for you to enlist. And each one of those gives you a bonus action or ability on your turn. And they'll be up in a market for everyone to choose from. But as soon as they're taken, you can take them from other players. Those actions might be move a rat from one space to another space on the board, or move 3 people from one space to another space, or look at 2 rat tokens, because the rats will dictate a threshold at which they activate the plague and remove cubes, and what they'll be removing cubes for. It's either for people who have the certain suits of those cards, or for the majority of cubes in the space, or every player in the space.
Okay.
So the order in which they trigger is also interesting, because sometimes you'll hit a rat and it's like, it's going to pop and nothing happens because it's too high. And then the next time it's a little lower, but sometimes you switch that up and you have 2 low ones, and then all of a sudden one triggers, boom, remove 3 things, and now there's 3 less things on the board to trigger that plague. So the threshold's a little lower.
I think another really clever thing about that system is that basically, the more of these little action cards you have, the more you get to do on your turn, but also the more vulnerable to the plague you are. Which I think is a really fun balance, where it's like, I had this really big turn where I did 4 things, but now I'm 4 times as vulnerable to the plague, since a lot of those character icons are sort of determine how your cubes or how vulnerable your cubes are, which is actually I think does a really fun job of balancing it. Like the more you're doing, the more vulnerable you are.
It's also
is this
really,
like you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's just got also a really fun thing where they kind of self-balance who has them, because if one player manages to get a whole bunch of these action cards, everybody else is going to go after that player's supply. So somebody has a really big turn, everybody's going to pick at that player.
and then all of a sudden they have no special actions. They have to start over again, whereas everybody else has kind of evened the field a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask how new a game this is, but looks like, I just looked it up. It looks like it's pretty old, back in originally released back in 2010.
Yeah. It's 2010. They just did a big box version of it last year, I think, where they included most of the expansions. That's the other great thing about this game is each expansion has come with basically different cards. So all of a sudden your simple ability of like, I'm going to move 3 cubes is now swapped with, I'm going to switch 3 of my cubes with 3 of your cubes in a location, or I'm going to set up these little nuns, and while the nuns are here, rats can't move into this territory, or I'm going to build walls and nobody can move between these territories where the wall is. And they just add fun, very simple, like language, like independent rules that are just iconography. It's so like quick and easy to figure out, but it's really hard to play between the different suits. And you can play games where it's just all one suit. You can play a whole game where you're playing as the knight class, and then you're just moving the plague piece around a lot more, removing a lot more pieces.
Yeah, I kind of love the flexibility of like how, do you want this to be a really aggressive game? Okay, play with all the aggressive action tokens. Or just like a really peaceful, or well, not peaceful, but
peaceful plague.
More, more like solitary, like stay out of my zone kind of game. Like you can sort of pick the different actions that your group is excited for.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. I'll have to play that. Yeah. We'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's game ends when either all the rat supplies is emptied onto the board, and that'll trigger the last round, or when a player manages to get all 20 of their cubes onto the board, which is very hard to do. At that point, we do a reverse round, and
I was going to say that. I was going to say that like reverse round is like basically it's just all the plague that's on the board. Like usually they don't always activate unless like something happens so to trigger it. But at the end of the game, you do activate all the plague that's still there, which is actually like a really fun sort of like climax to the game where you're like, ooh, I'm winning. I just have to survive all the little plague tokens that are still there, which I think is a really nice kind of like built-in climax to the game every time you play.
Nice.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. All right. We'll definitely have to check it out. We haven't heard of this game before, so we need to check it out. All right. So when I was talking about Babylon, I was talking about our friend Albert getting analysis paralysis, or as we call it in an industry, AP. Kind of like overanalyzing and kind of like a little bit paralyzed with how many choices he has to make. Do you, like you two as game designers, do you get AP?
I do. I definitely do. Yeah. I was raised playing chess with my dad, who would take like 10-minute turns. It was so long, but anyway, so I think it runs in my family. But
and you're like, I'm so much better than he is.
Oh, I am. I only take like 7-minute turns, But yeah, I mean, for me, I do feel like I enjoy games that have just a little bit of luck, or like some hidden information, because if it is something like chess, which I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with after playing so much of it. But with something like chess where you can really know everything, like I get that AP feeling. So I love a game that's got just a little bit of hidden information or luck, where it's like, this is the best choice I can make. I'm just going to go for it, and we can all move on with our game.
Yeah, I was curious because, definitely one of us here gets pretty bad AP.
You do too. Just saying, preliminarily.
You're famous for it.
No, it's not. This is misinformation.
Oh, no.
I'm just saying, there's certain games, but most of the time, I'm pretty speedy.
Listen, I'm going to flatter you. I'm going to say I attribute it to her being smart and then seeing more things than the typical gamer has, right? So, therefore, she's like, well...
Beautiful minding it.
Yeah, she's beautiful minding it. She sees all the different possibilities.
It takes time, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we have AP-prone players at the table, then no one wins. But we do. Actually, yeah, maybe you do. But we have this secret weapon in this battle. This is Magic Mind mental performance shots. You've probably heard us talk about this on the show before in previous episodes, because they're healthy boosts that we like to use to get us through exhausting board game conventions, long parties, game parties, and such. But because we're actually regular subscribers now, we get them shipped to us each month. So we use them for everyday use. So that means we're using them to kind of power up like our board game sessions. So a shot of Magic Mind before board gaming gives us kind of this mental edge, and I think it brushes away a lot of cobwebs. You get it? It's Halloween. Cobwebs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good job.
So it kind of lets us focus a little bit more on kind of making the right moves in whatever we're playing. It's just sort of, you get tired, things will slow down a little bit, but mental Magic Mind will kind of help us keep focus. So just recently, we're trying to play Minos, the Bronze Age, which is a heavier Euro game from Board and Dice that we talked about on a previous episode. There's because there's dice involved, but the value of the dice would trigger different things. There's a lot to think about, but I was tired from traveling, and I'm like, I need to have some Magic Mind before I play this game because of all the traveling we had to do that weekend to get there. So, yeah, and then when we're both not at 100%, like we're always like Magic Mind, you gotta take Magic Mind, yeah. So it's a great to have for board game conventions and such, and board game parties, and it saved the day for us when we're trying to play this really heavy game, and kept us going all that weekend. It was a board game retreat, so shout out to Corey from Above Board for hosting us that weekend. But yeah, it kept us going all weekend, helped us survive the board games, and let Christina learn and teach something as heavy as Minos during a game getaway like that, and gave me the energy to play. So if you'd like to try out Magic Mind mental performance shots for yourself, go to magicmind.com/analog20 and use the promo code analog20 for 20% off your order. And because Magic Mind is sponsoring Going Analog, your order will be supporting this show as well. So
Thanks. Let's start off talking about your topic, though, Ben and Dan. What are we going to talk about today?
We're talking about spooky games.
Yes.
And yeah, this was inspired by Creepshow, obviously. 'Cause I feel like we as we were designing that game, we spent a lot of time like thinking about what makes a spooky game and what are our favorite spooky games, and how to like. Because I don't know, as a fan of horror and spooky things, I know I'm always looking for more like games to play during like the sort of September, October. Yeah, where it's like, hey, we can have a spooky game night, invite all our friends over, and it's an excuse to make everyone, play something really, maybe darker than they would, something spookier and darkier than like
And so tell us about Creepshow.
Well, yeah, here we have it, or I have a one right here for the YouTube bulb. I don't know if it's reversed, but
very creepy art. Love that classic sort of retro.
I will say
vibe.
One thing I'm really bummed out about is so you actually sent us a copy to play in anticipation of this show, and then we had two different game events that were like, okay, we're gonna play Creepshow at this event, and then we ran out of time. Another night, it was like we had a super late start and we didn't get to it, and then this last week I was out of town, and I'm like, we just could not get to the game. We're going to play at this next game party, but I'm like, what a waste. Like, you sent this to us so that we could talk about
timing.
it. Yeah, but so sorry we didn't get to it, but yeah, please tell us more about what the game is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. Dan, do you want to?
Sure,
I feel like I've been talking. Yeah.
So in Creepshow, we're going to be playing as one of the creeps. We'll all be creeps, and we're all trying to tell... Ooh, beautiful. We're trying to tell the best stories about the worst people getting their just desserts. And how we're going to be doing that is through a combination of two types of cards: suspense cards and story cards. Story cards are going to be the structure of the game, but suspense is going to be the main mechanic of the game. How that's going to work is we'll be playing story cards on villains who will have a little bit of flavor text set up saying like, this terrible person did this awful thing, but little did they know XYZ monsters after them. And then you'll begin with a story in Act 1, as most good stories start. And you'll be playing from Act 1 to Act 3, and then there'll be an ending card that gets played at the end to cap it off. Throughout that, you'll have different actions on those story cards. They might allow you to earn some points, let somebody else play suspense cards. You might be able to play suspense cards yourself. You might be able to peek at suspense cards. You might be able to remove suspense cards. And right now you're like, Dan, you said suspense cards like 7 or 8 times. Can you please explain what is a suspense card? Suspense
is killing me.
Hey, that's part of the game. Ooh,
good job.
I think that's on the box somewhere. If it's not, I'm so sorry. But the way that works is everybody has a hand of 10 cards. They have the same values on them, and they have their own special player character on the back and their color on the front. The values range from -2 all the way up to 3. So -2, then there's 3 1s, 3 2s, and 3 3s. Depending on player count, you remove some of those 3s. And you are playing a little bit of an area control game where you are trying to have the most suspense on a story at the end if it's good. But I'm going to pass it back to Ben to continue talking about this for a little bit.
I think the interesting thing that we found here is that like it's a little bit of an area control game. It's a little bit of a push your luck game where basically as a group you are building a set of stories. You're building a horror anthology, right? Which is sort of classic Creepshow. Yeah, and so. But, every good horror story needs suspense. So you play these story cards, and basically you're adding suspense cards face down to each story. And obviously when I add a suspense card, I can look at my card and see, choose any value I want. But it's face down, so nobody else knows what I put in that story. Which is, that's kind of the core of the game, because then you can, the next person plays and you've got cards that check suspense. And that sort of force you to make a push your luck decision where it's like, do I think there's 8 suspense in this pile? Because if there is, maybe I can score some points. And then you look at this pile of face down cards and you're like, well, there's 5 cards there. As long as there's no -2 and they're all, and they're high enough, like I can score points. And that's really the core of the game, is like sort of judging what or trying to get in your opponent's heads and figure out like how much they put into each pile. And then, at the end, it gets a little bit trickier where you add the endings and if you have the most suspense on a story when it ends, you score bonus points. If you trick someone else into ending a story early and letting a villain escape, then everyone who had suspense there scores points. So there's there's, like I said, it's a really fun mix of area control and push your luck, I think, that, and for a pretty cheap little card game, so. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we were demoing it at Gen Con, and it was always super satisfying, to like be explaining it, and you get to these moments, people are like, and it, like, I don't know. Every time we were explaining it, it clicked, and it felt good, and I was like, oh, this game is fun. Because I feel like we get blind sometimes, after like working on it so many times and playtesting it so much, and by the time we take a break, we send it to the printer and take a break for a couple months, and then it comes back, and I'm like, oh, this is a fun game. Great.
I can be proud of it.
Yeah, exactly. But not until other people say I can be proud of it,
It's a cool looking game too, as well. It's because when I was a kid, I had this fascination with I don't know, is there, what do you call this genre of comic? Like the Tales from the Crypt, those.
It's like EC Comics was the original, and then Tales from the Crypt was like the spin-off that came on HBO later, and then Creepshow was in the 80s.
But just like really pulpy horror kind of is the vibe. Yeah,
a little bit
I used to love those. It was like the original comics were before my time, but I used to collect like the collections and collected the graphic novels, and I just always loved the campiness too. So I just like love the vibe. I love the look of this.
Well, and that was one of the
dig into it.
That was one of the most fun parts about making this game, is that we like Skybound publishes a Creepshow graphic novel that has like an individual it's a comic book. It's got individual issues that are each their own self-contained story, and we basically got full access to all of the art for this game.
Oh, okay.
So it was like, we have 60 some unique story cards, and they can all have unique artwork, from these. That's cool. Yeah, and it's all top quality like graphic novel comic book art. So I don't know, it's gorgeous. I feel like it's the best looking game that we made at Skybound, in the last couple of years, because we had such and it was So I don't know, never has artwork for a game been so easy.
Very cool.
Awesome. And then, obviously there's so many other like fun games of lots of different sorts. So for me, we were thinking about like, what are our favorite spooky games? Mm-hmm. And the one that always comes to my mind immediately for Halloween season is Abomination. Mm-hmm. I really like, it's just a really thematic worker placement game. Mm-hmm. And in Abomination, you are tasked by Frankenstein's creature to make him a companion, essentially, right? And so it's a very sort of dark gray board, and you're playing basically essentially a mad scientist. You're trying to pretend you're reputable so you get access to cadavers, but really you're creepy, right? And so and then the whole point of it is you're traveling around, sending your workers out, trying to build up a reputation, but also you are collecting organs and power,
Yeah.
as you do, because you need to make, Frankenstein's companion. So it's just like, you might be digging in a graveyard and get some bones. If you want a fresher body, you're going to go visit the morgue, So it's very, very morbid. And it just like everything is so thematic about that game. For me, I think of Abomination immediately. It is a pretty long game. So they did actually put out an official sort of shortened variant that was approved by Plaid Hat, the publisher. And I think it's called the Igor variant. So I always play with that.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah. I was going to say, just on the topic of general spooky games, I feel like one of the problems that I had, and I think something that we were trying to deal with a little bit with Creepshow, is that I think because like board games are a sort of very social format where you have to, we're playing with a bunch of friends, usually in a well-lit space, like it's kind of difficult to like really be like scary, I guess, in one of these games. I think like, a lot of times it's more kind of like, I think Abomination's great, like you were talking about, where it's like we're doing this worker placement game, but it's like the subject matter is so creepy and morbid, and we're like, oh, we're just all friends here as we do this really like bad stuff, like as we're like if you actually stop and think about what we're doing. But yeah, I don't know. It's just a challenge. I think like when we're looking at games where it's like, how do we actually make them scary? Is it possible even to make them like scary? Like you would in a video game or a movie?
Because Shu will tell you, like he loves horror, like films and TV shows. I do not, but when it is Halloween time, I do want to play creepy games. So that's when I'm actually open to it.
Because they're not actually scary, to Ben's point.
Yeah,
and because I have that distance because I'm not in it. I guess.
Yeah.
Have you played My Father's Work?
I want to. He did.
I was going to mention that,
but
tell people more about it.
Yeah.
Oh, My Father's Work is a game from Renegade Games. It's a similar theme where you are a mad scientist. You've inherited some money in the grounds and a family estate, and you are trying to do your master work. It's an app-based board game as well. I actually haven't gotten to it yet. It's on my shelf of shame, but like. I've been like sitting there looking at it. Yeah, so much. I'm like, all right.
It's so creepy.
Yeah,
how do you that rule book?
What do you think of the comparison between the two of Abomination and that?
Abomination's also, My Father's Work is also worker placement.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it has, if I remember, the base game comes with 3 scenarios. Our friend Brian showed it to us, and then he showed us the first scenario. And what's kind of cool is each one sets up the game very differently because and it's been a couple of years, so I might not have all the details right, but we're experimenting in this town, and similarly in this scenario is very similar to Abomination, where as you start to do more inappropriate things on how you start to build a reputation, the townsfolk might start to kind of come at you with pitchforks and torches because they're like, they want you out of this town. But there's some politics involved. There's like other things like with the government and the military might start to step in and start to change what happens in a game. And then you have to vote as a group, like, do we want to accept this thing? And again, I don't remember, it's been so long since I played it, but that will actually change some parameters and rules around the game. So even within a scenario, things might kind of change to like, now we're friendly to the military, which makes the local townsfolk hate us even more, or vice versa, and things like that. So there's that kind of dynamic woven throughout the game, which is pretty cool.
Right on.
Yeah.
Ooh, I got to get to that.
But I will say, so Ben, you're saying like we're playing a lot of games in this very brightly lit social environment. It's not scary by nature. Have you two heard of the Night Cage?
I've heard of it. I have not gotten to play it yet. Yeah. So, for me, this is my automatic answer as well.
And I knew he would pick that.
Yeah, she knows.
Pick Abomination instead.
I love the theme. I love the visuals on the board, and they even encourage you. I don't remember this. I think this is included even in one version of the game where the tea lights, right? So they're like, you can play this game, just like turn down the lights, and we literally did this. We turned down the lights. And it just had little tea lights, little flame. Fire's a little too dangerous, like real candles. to be in a room surrounded by cardboard and such. But so we just had these little flickering tea lights just lighting up the game. You're just getting this ambient light, but it fits the theme of what you're doing in the game as well. So it's up to a 4-player cooperative game. And then what happens is we kind of wake up. It's almost like set up sort of like a Saw type movie, but maybe not so modern age. So the 4 of us wake up in this dungeon, like these narrow corridors, and all we have is one candle to light the way. And then what we have to do is sort of start to find each other, find keys to be able to unlock certain things that will let us out of this maze. But there's creatures kind of crawling in the darkness here. So how this works in gameplay is you can only ever see one tile ahead of you. That's as far as the candle in the theme can light. So you can't. But what happens is, so if I advance down a hallway, I'm drawing tiles and then kind of drawing this map as I go. I could see all the 4 directions around me because, again, that's the radius of my light source. But if I continue going, what's behind me that I previously explored, those tiles get removed because the maze is changing. It's like this nightmarish dungeon where, okay, if you don't see it anymore and you go back, it's not going to be the same as what it was before. So part of the strategy is like if I found, okay, I have a key here, but I have to get it over there. I might need, for example, Christina to now work her way over to me so she could keep it lit. So that tile on the board doesn't disappear. And then I can go grab it and then move it and then transfer it to somebody else. But it's all about coordinating to make sure like there's certain passageways or certain key tiles on the board that we have to keep lit because otherwise it'll disappear in the darkness. And then meanwhile, there's monsters floating around and you have to deal with them.
Very stressful.
Yeah, it's stressful. And because of the theme, because of the scenario, because of how they set it up, it's really important if you're going to play this game and run it to read people the flavor text to like what you're doing in this room, why we're there. There's even things like we can't walk past each other because the corridors are too narrow. So they explain everything so well to kind of really put you in a mood. So to me, this is the closest I've gotten to. I didn't literally get scared. It's not, it's not like watching a horror movie or.
There was tension.
Yeah.
Are we going to win?
You feel it.
Butter right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I if you want to get those kind of feels and kind of like, oh, this is the closest I could get to for me, in my experience, the closest I got to being a little creeped out in a game and then just finding a setting so fascinating, look for the Night Cage.
Yeah. That sounds really fun. That totally up my alley. But yeah, I was going to say, we mentioned tension because I do feel like, I don't know, just drawing that line between like being scared and feeling tension, where it's like, oh man, I feel like board games they're so good at tension, right? Where it's like we're so invested, we're so involved, like in whatever's happening on the table, and trying to like crossing that line from like tension to scared, I think is challenging, and not even that it should be crossed all the time, right? Because it's definitely for a very like specific audience and a specific like group of people, I was going to say, I think the closest like that I've seen is it's more of an RPG than a board game, and I think our RPGs are better at it, I think. But Dread, the RPG, which it's essentially just Jenga with a story attached. Where you
I've heard of this.
It's like it's an indie RPG from a couple of years ago where like it's like, oh, you're running from some zombies and you're gonna try to jump out the window. So in order to do that without hurting yourself, pull a cube or pull a stick from the Jenga tower. Just the amount of tension that builds and the amount of fear where you'll get people that are all of a sudden they're like, I'd rather walk down the stairs and risk getting eaten by the zombies than actually like do something risky, like once the tower starts getting higher. But yeah, I don't know. As far as
what about you, Dan?
Oh, well, if we're talking like actually, I love horror games because you can do so much stuff with them. I mean, you got spooky games where it feels like maybe a little pasted on, like the theme is there and the story's there and it's something you're familiar with and you love it, but it's really just like an intricate board game. But then you got stuff where it's a little lighter, but something that like could be a little scary. There's a game where players will play blindfolded. Well, most of the players will play blindfolded, and one of the players will be able to see, and that's Nyctophobia.
Yes, I remember.
And it's operated by touch. So you have like a 3D like plastic grid of spaces, and one player will set up the board with either walls or trees, depending on the version. And each player will have an individual player piece that will have a different shape. So you'll know your piece by touch, and you'll be able to operate one finger at a time. And on your turn, you can explore around your space and see what's around you. You can throw rocks, and the person who can see can tell you how far it goes, if it makes a noise, if it hits something. And you'll play this game moving through a space. You're trying to maybe escort somebody back to a car or find someone and then bring them to safety. And occasionally, when you throw a rock and you hear it just goes, it doesn't really hit anything. And then it hits something. It sounds pretty close. And then there's somebody else in the space with you. And then that space that was empty, all of a sudden you put your finger out and you're like, there's someone right next to me that wasn't there before. And
that's cool.
It's a really fun little one versus many like sensory exploration, because you can't see. I believe the designer developed it for
it was for her. I think it was either her uncle or her father who's blind.
Yeah.
And so this was a game she could actually play with him, so she designed it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so cool.
And I mean, and it's just like, as like a person who can see, I don't experience things in that way, and it's just removing that aspect of my like senses, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, what is this whole new world down here? And then the tension that builds and like brings to the table, and you can play that totally dark, lit by candles, and it's just spooky. I have the vampire one.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I remember playing that once at like a big board game day, and everybody was like, "You guys look very strange."
Yeah.
Because we all had like those blackout
sunglasses, on,
things like that. And then maybe a couple quick hits, because like obviously during Halloween time, you want to play some spooky themed games, maybe with kids and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So, do any sort of lighter spooky games come to mind?
Oh yeah.
Quick hits for you, Shu?
Like booty call.
I know you mentioned, Christina, Campy Creatures. This is a fun game. It's not scary at all, but it's just the artwork.
Campy fun.
Yeah, the artwork's all classic monsters, like Hollywood type monsters. So you'll have a vampire, a mummy, I think a creature from the lagoon, and things like that. But I really like this game just because the artwork's so beautiful. And then this is from Keymaster, right? Just Keymaster. And it's one of those games. I'm still trying to, maybe you two can help me with this. I'm trying to figure out what's a name, if there is a name. I don't think there is one, for the genre of games where everyone has the same cards, the same X mini cards, same deck.
Yeah.
And then which card you choose to play is all the gameplay.
I don't know if there's a name for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is remains a mystery to this day, because there are a lot of games
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I think Skybound made a Walking Dead one like that, right?
Yeah.
And then Campy Creatures is one. Libertalia is another famous one. But it's like we all know what we have in each other's hands. It's like the order in which you play it will determine the gameplay. And now that card's out of your hand, you could strategize around that. It's like, oh, Shu played his number 5 card. He no longer has his number 5 card to play with. So there's a ton of great games in that genre. But
that one's fun too.
Campy Creatures like very simple, like where you're trying to get a higher number, if I recall, than everyone else, but then
to pick at humans to experiment on.
Yeah, that's right. But then all the card, depending on what you play, they'll have different powers that associate with them that will mess up the flow. But then once they're out of play, it's like other people can take advantage of that. So it's a really fun like card game.
Yeah.
Any light games for you that come to mind, Ben?
It's not that light, but Mysterium from a couple years ago.
Oh yeah.
Which is I just feel like it's such a fun presence on the table, and also like gives you an excuse to like turn the lights down and have a seance. Like I think the sort of asking clues of the clue giver or the ghost in that game, where we're all pretending to have a seance and then they can only communicate by knocking on the table, is so atmospheric and fun, and feels very, very appropriate for spooky season.
And did I ask Dan? Do you have one
Dan?
too?
Oh yeah. So this is one I picked up recently. Actually, it's a solo game I've been enjoying quite a bit. It's actually on oh gosh, Drive Through Cards, I think is where I ordered it from. It's Decula. It's a solo game where you're playing as a vampire and you've got visitors and you don't want visitors in your castle. So you'll flip a card and choose whether to put it in your tableau and score it later or action off of it, or burn it for energy, which is currency you can use to buy other things later or activate things. And the goal of the game is to not have any guests in your house at the end of the deck. And you just want to enjoy being an old vampire in a castle by yourself.
Don't we all? Yeah.
Yeah. The one thing that came to mind that I was like, oh, this actually fits too is like the Bezier game Werewords. Of course, you can play Werewolf and all of that stuff. But I like Werewords as like a party game around the season too, because you can play it with an app where it's going to, you're basically playing hidden roll 20 questions, right? Depending on whether you're the werewolf or you're a villager. And then this app is going to run like, oh, these people need to go to sleep. If you're the mayor, you get the secret word and you can only answer yes, no questions, right? But the app will have very atmospheric music. So as people have their eyes closed and everything, then you can have spooky music going on too. So it works for a fun party game during Halloween time, I think.
Nice.
Yeah. So, next topic. Shu, what was our topic again?
We have a couple of designers here who were previously employed by a publisher. Now they're independent publishers. And I'm just kind of wondering, what's life like? And then, again, there's also, like I mentioned at the top of the show, sometimes we know lots of game designers who will also work for one publisher, but make games for they freelance as well and make projects for other publishers. So I'm wondering, we'll start with you, Ben. Like, what is to you, like, what are the pros and cons of, say, working at a publisher?
Oh man. I mean, I guess the pro to me is that consistency, right? Like you've kind of well, I don't want to say always, but usually you have like a slate of projects lined up like to work on that or that have like a high chance of getting published. And that's kind of and I think that has to do with where the mandate for the project comes from, because I feel like a lot of times if you're approaching it from the other side where you have an independent designer who, designs an excellent game and then they have to find, a studio or a publisher who agrees that it's excellent and has space for it in their pipeline. And, that marriage needs to happen, and that's difficult sometimes. Whereas like when you're a designer working for a publisher, the publisher will say, we have an IP, we have Creepshow that we want to make a game for, get to work, and then it's kind of like you start from there and you kind of build from that direction. And then, it's still a challenge of like coming up with something and getting it to be good enough to publish and be successful. But the uncertainty of like, will I spend years of my life on this design and then it'll never see the light of day? Like that doesn't exist quite as much. I think. I don't know. I think that's the main difference to me.
All right. What are your thoughts, Dan?
Yeah, it's similar. It's very much you run into passion projects versus assignments, and assignments can be passion projects too at the same time. Like very much, Ben and I jumped at the chance to work on Creepshow. It was like, that's the one we want to do right there, because we're both big fans. But then, I'm also sitting over here like messing around with like little independent things, so that I'm like, oh, maybe one day, I'll take this somewhere and like put it in my bindle and like carry it down the road and say, hey, what's going on over here? But I actually started at Skybound not in the games department. I was actually in the operation side of things. So I was in the warehouse, and I would say, hey, I've got a thing. Can I come show you this game I worked on? And like I had a meeting with the games department and we tried it out, and then it was like, not for us, but good initiative. And that's still in the back pocket. We still got things. And honestly, there's a little bit more freedom when you're working on something that's wholly you, and you can make it and you can take advice and you can hopefully find the home that fits your vision for it. But at the same point, there's all that uncertainty that comes with that too. And then the searching and the iterating, and trying to make it fit other molds that maybe don't necessarily align with what you wanted it to be. But, getting it published, is that the more important thing?
Now, your example where you came up with an idea, you pitched it, and then the publisher you worked at didn't necessarily want it. It wasn't a good. Sometimes it's not the right fit for them. That happens.
Yeah.
Do they automatically? Does the publisher automatically get first right of refusal? Your employer?
I think that's going to be different for every publisher.
Company.
For every Like I know, I think like for Skybound. Man, I know I started working at Skybound 10 years ago, so I don't, and I think when I got hired, I was just an assistant who wrote cards for Super Fight sometimes, and so I don't think that they officially had a first right of refusal for me, but I'm sure that other companies would, for their designers, so I'm sure it's just based on whatever your contract is.
Yeah.
Okay. And if they give you, let's say you did take a game to them and they didn't want it, is it generally understood that you own the idea behind that game and you could take it elsewhere and shop it elsewhere? Is that automatically a given?
Oh man, I don't think it's automatically a given. I would like if you're. Oh, what was that, Dan?
It gets into a little bit of legal stuff there, depending on your contract again. Did you work on it using any company materials? Did you do it on the company computer? And also, what's the intent behind the pitch? Is it something you're iterating on that already exists within the company's library? Are you hey, here's a fun expansion? Are you saying, hey, this would be a great companion game using your ideas? Or would it be just this is a fun thing I came up with? What do you think?
Right.
Yeah, I know that's not an exciting answer of it's different every time, but I think that's realistically how it works.
Yeah, I'm curious because at video game companies, I work in a video game industry, and a lot of times they're pretty strict about that stuff, and it's usually if you're working on anything, you're gonna have to clear it ahead of time. You make sure you clear it with somebody. There's usually a department, like a side projects department or legal, that's going to say okay, hey, you're okay to work on this and this belongs to you. They want to kind of work that out up front before you kind of get too far with it and then have a product in the end. And the same kind of questions as you mentioned, Dan, is did you use company time, company computer? And if so, I think generally video game companies tend to be this belongs to us. And sometimes they'll be cool about it. They might be okay, well, we'll let you have it, or this is not something that we want.
Stop that.
But, yeah, stop working on company time. That's a very fair request, I think. But yeah, you got to clear this stuff with somebody at some point to make sure you can continue with it, or even release it someday, and make sure that your employer doesn't just take it and keep it for themselves. But again, that rarely happens. I think they're just kind of covering themselves in case those situations where hey, you kind of got these ideas from us, or something like that.
Yeah, and
I mean, it seems to me in the board game space that there's so many more independent designers, right? And so that seems to be a thing. Everybody has these personal projects and might take them elsewhere. Are you, obviously the stability of working for a publisher is something that would be really nice, but are you excited about being able to be freelance? Are you looking for another sort of more permanent position? How do you feel about your life right now?
Oh man!
How do you feel about your life?
Big feelings, big questions.
Gosh, yeah.
Yes.
I don't know.
Therapy. No.
I don't know. I can go first.
Yep.
I think if a publisher was to come to me tomorrow and be like, hey, do you want another position? I'd be like, sure, great. But also I was at Skybound for 10 years, so I'm also excited for a change of pace, and I'm kind of excited to not be doing exactly what I was doing for, another who knows how many years. And I think right now it's sort of the thing I'm wrestling with is I was doing design work at Skybound, but I was also doing all the lots of things from the publishing side. And it's do I just want to start an indie publisher and start publishing my own stuff, And so I think that's sort of the fork in the road right now. And I don't know, it could, ask me again next year and we'll maybe I'll know, but that's what I'm weighing right now.
As your now life coach, Christina will check in with you yearly.
Yeah.
I'll put it on my calendar. Don't worry.
Sounds good.
How about you, Dan?
Right now, I'm looking for work. I'm out there checking in, seeing who's hiring. I do kind of need a little bit more stability in my life right now. As I mentioned earlier, I have a young son, and we're just trying to keep the wheels on the wagon right now.
Yeah.
But I do have like designs I'm working on, and I do have stuff I want to shop around too. So it's not like I'm fully like putting on the suit and tie, heading back into an office, but at the same point, I do want to keep exploring that side of the creativity. I want to be able to build stuff for myself and, see where it goes.
Awesome. One final quick question. Now that if you like, do you have like one thing that you just like your dream project that like if you had all the resources all the time that you're like, I want this made? Do you guys have something in mind?
Yeah.
I do. Yeah. Dan, do you want to go this time?
Yeah. I really wanted.
Don't tell too much.
Just generally. I don't need you to steal your design.
I want to do something with Castlevania one day.
Oh. Okay.
One day.
For me, I feel like I've been tooling around with I want to make a game about dinosaurs, and I want it like a dinosaur. Like I'm picturing like medieval knights riding dinosaurs, something.
Ooh, okay.
But the problem is I've gone through like 8 different versions of this design where it's like, oh, are we jousting? Is it like you pick a dinosaur and then you enter a joust and you bet on jousts, or is it like, oh, this is your kingdom and you're taming dinosaurs to control your kingdom, or is it a cooperative game where you're all taming dinosaurs to work together to build a dinotopia sort of situation? And I don't know, but I feel like that's the like someday dream project. Like I don't know what the best version of it is. I don't know where it fits into the marketplace, but that's I keep like if I'm just like lying awake in bed at night, like that's the design that like
dreaming about dinosaurs.
Yeah. That's my white whale thing.
One day it'll feel right,
Yeah.
and then that'll be it. So thanks so much for joining us today, Ben and Dan. We had a ton of fun talking to you. Where can people follow you and what you'll be up to these days? Are you on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Kepner Raptor. Again, dinosaurs.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's probably the best place.
I'm
And you, Dan?
not on socials. I am on Instagram, but
Okay.
it's kind of a ghost account. It's called Just Here for Work. That's really what it is.
Okay. In case you have something, we will look there. So thanks. Thanks again to our super fantastic editor, Mike Zipkin. And don't forget to sign up for our live in-person board game quiz show at BGGCon in a few weeks. We should make this quiz show real soon too, Shu. Fun times.
That's a good point. We need to start, right? We need to
It's going
start
to be
writing.
amazing. It's going to be amazing. I love doing a music round. You're going to have a music round again this time. So join us.
No,
and say
we're
hi.
not. We talked about this. We're going to do a movie round this time to change it up.
We'll see. We'll fight about this. Okay.
Movies, music.
Yeah.
There you go.
But if you see us at BGCon, make sure to say hi and join in when you can. Now you can stop listening and go play a game. Bye.
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 Bye.